Great, and welcome everyone. We are just giving folks a couple more minutes to arrive, and we will start the webinar probably in 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you for bearing with us. And as we get started, I think people do have access to the Q&A. So if you have a question as we go along, please feel free to put it in the question and answer box. And we will see what questions we can answer if we have time. And otherwise, we will. It's helpful to have questions that we can figure out how to answer over time. So Q&A box is open.
We've had one question already about the recording. The recording will be available after the webinar.
Great, and we will talk more. If folks have not seen our website, we will be sure to share that link several times where people can continue to provide us feedback and where we will post the webinar recording as soon as we can get it up there after we finish today. Like folks are continuing to arrive, we'll give them another minute and we will get going. All right, I've got 10:04, so we will start this webinar. And just again, for folks who are just joining, the question and answer is open. Feel free to put your questions in there, and we can either try to answer them today or at on our website. And again, this webinar is being recorded, and we will post it on our website as soon as we can get it up following this webinar. So good morning. My name is Hannah Pinkery. I'm the Director of the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. And we're here today to talk about the planning and engagement work for the Governor's Executive Order. The official order is an order to strengthen Maine's economy and communities by developing an Office of New Americans. So during the course of this webinar, we're going to talk a little bit more about what the executive order requires of our office, some of the specific details, and our team, who you can see on your webinar today, who's going to be doing the work, hopefully with many of you out there on this webinar to think about this office and what it might mean for the state of Maine. So next slide. So just a quick overview. Our office, the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, was created by Governor Janet Mills in 2019. Our goal is to think about long-term policy for our state and to work across state government. Listing just a couple of our focus areas, which include climate policy and planning, economic and workforce policy, the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan. We oversee the Governor's Children's Cabinet and Early Childhood Data Systems Project, opioid response, housing policy and coordination, coordination of the Governor's Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Coordinating Committee, the Aging Cabinet, and the Ending Hunger Plan by 2030. Many of these projects were assigned to us by Governor Mills, some by law, some by the state legislature. But again, we work with lots of key folks across state government, in Maine's communities, in municipalities, and work on a lot of projects that are similar in scope and scale to this Office of New Americans project. Next slide. So in August, Governor Janet Mills signed an executive order directing our office to develop a plan for establishing an Office of New Americans in state government. So you can read her quote, what she said about this office, but she specifically, I'll just read the very end. She asked that her order develop a plan for a new office that will help to ensure that Maine is fully drawing on the talents and skills of those who want to live and work in Maine and contribute to our great state. This is a critical step for Maine's economic future as we address our workforce shortage and support our communities and businesses. So that really outlines the work that we are looking to undertake. How can we engage new Americans in our state, in our economy, in our communities, in our workforce? Next slide. So specifically, the executive order described the purpose of this office as dedicated to supporting the long-term economic and civic integration of immigrants in Maine and supporting the goals of Maine's 10-year economic development strategy. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Our office is specifically directed to engage key stakeholders, including immigrant communities, municipalities, schools and colleges, employers, community-based organizations, and other state agencies for inputs on this office. The plan requires that we outline the mission and structure of the office, the timing of its establishment, and the scope of its work. The governor's executive order also directed us to participate in the Office of New Americans State Network, a national network of other states who are engaged in this work to access information and best practices. We're going to talk a little bit more about what this network is, other states who are engaged. And the probably most important thing is the deadline for us is to deliver this plan to Governor Mills and the legislature by January 19th, just this upcoming winter. So our work is before us this fall. Next slide. So probably many of you on this webinar have heard quite a bit about Maine's 10-year economic development strategy. I will specifically say this is led by Heather Johnson, the Commissioner of the Department of Economic and Community Development. It was released in early 2020. The plan specifically forecasted, with the help of the Department of Labor, a 65,000 person contraction in Maine's workforce over the next 10 years. The plan specifically outlined a goal of adding 75,000 people to the workforce by the end of this decade. The plan specifically quoted, "Maine must be known by new Americans across the United States as the most effective state to find a meaningful job that matches their career aspirations with their prior skills." So this is how we think that Maine's 10-year economic strategy specifically fits into the work of this Office of New Americans. Obviously, there's lots of other work underway to engage young people, to engage folks who are not a part of our economy to meet this $75,000 goal, 75,000 person goal, but obviously this is one of many strategies. Next slide. So there's lots of entities in state government that are already engaging with New Americans in many ways, and we are going to work with many of those state agencies on this plan. So this is the specific list. You've probably worked with many of them in your work, but the Department of Economic and Community Development, Department of Labor, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Education, Department of Professional and Financial Regulation that does a lot of the state licensing, Department of Administration and Financial Services, which oversees the state budget and state hiring, Maine Housing, the Maine Community College System, and the University of Maine system. These agencies are already key partners in much of our work around workforce and economic development strategies, but they will be, their leadership and staff will be key to thinking about this plan and how it will best work within state government. Next slide. So I'm going to pass it off to the team members that you see on your webinar screen. But I said at the top that we have a website, and the address is here, maine.gov/future/ONA. You can both sign up for our email list for updates on the plan and development. The email list will also keep people posted on events and outreach sessions happening across the state of Maine. We have a contact form on this page if you want to reach out to our staff, send us input input and feedback on the plan, or asks to set up a meeting with our staff. Our website also has the governor's executive order, a little more information about the Office of New Americans Network. You can find a link to the 10-year economic development strategy that I mentioned, and lots of other resources as we add them. So I'm really excited. We have a great team. I mentioned all the folks across state government who are too numerous to name all the people and players, but we have 3 people in our office who are going to help to really do the outreach, both in state government and across the state of Maine on this plan. You can see them here, but Greg Payne, George Makoko, as well as Erica Harris. I've also got Tony Ronzio, who's the deputy director of our office. He does our press outreach. He's helping us to manage this Zoom webinar and is engaged in many different ways. So I'm going to ask Greg and then George and then Erica to each quickly introduce themselves. And then Erica and George will go through a couple more slides about next steps.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Payne, and I serve as the Senior Advisor on Housing Policy in the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation and the Future. In my housing role, I've had the opportunity to work with many of you, and so I'm helping out on this initiative, especially with some of the outreach and partner engagement that'll take place over the next couple of months. I am really excited to work with Hannah and Erica and George and you all and so many others across the state. And I'm going to turn it over now to George to introduce himself. Thanks.
Good evening, good morning to everyone. My name is George Budag Makoko, and I'm now consulting with the GoPIF on this initiative of creating the Office of New America. And my little bit of background, I was born in Congo, grew up there, and moved here in 2002. So it's been 21 years since I moved here. 5 years ago, I started publishing the Jambo Africa newspaper, and but also the founder of Ladder to the Moon Network. I couldn't be more excited to be part of this project, and I'm just looking forward to where this initiative is going to take us to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, George. So my name is Erica Carly Harris, and I do workforce policy in the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future. I've worked in GoPIF for a couple of years, and part of my role in this project is going to be coordinating with the Office of New Americans, or ONA, state network, which I'm going to share a little bit about here. So the Office of New Americans State Network is a forum for state policy leaders to drive positive change that supports immigrant and refugee inclusion and economic development. The network is a space for states to share best practices on immigrant integration, learn from issue experts, and engage with federal partners. And we have already set up meetings with multiple states, which has been really helpful to talk through their process and learn from them. Maine is the 19th state to join the network. So the Offices of New Americans, these slides actually come from the state network, which is organized in part by World Education Services. And they're each set up a little bit differently depending on the needs of the states. And ONA can serve as a direct service provider. They may offer technical assistance to relevant state agencies on how to meet the unique needs of immigrants, refugees, and displaced people. ONAs may also provide advice and direction to the governor, legislators, relevant state agencies. And ONA, importantly, is responsible for implementing statewide immigrant inclusion initiatives. So looking at ONA goals and objectives from other states, again, they really differ in structure, placement, duties, available budget. Most have the mission of promoting the economic inclusion of immigrants and refugees with a really robust workforce development system, which you will see reflected in the executive order from earlier in August. And some have one or more of the following additional charges that you'll see here. So you might see expanding language access, coordinating naturalization ceremonies, convening government agencies, community stakeholders, which, as Hannah mentioned earlier, is a role that GoPIF typically might serve, and some of these other roles. ONA priorities, and as part of this planning process, we are really looking to hear from all of you on what your key priorities are and what you might see as the mission and structure and scope of work of the main Office of New Americans. So typically, initially, ONAs would focus on organization and structure, and then they shift to policy reforms for the state and immigrant and refugee communities. Typical actions include listening sessions, stakeholder engagement, naturalization ceremonies, advisory groups, developing licensing guides or pathways, and embarking on a service gap analysis. Looking backwards and forwards through this planning process, so it's hard to believe, but it is now September 6th. And so for the past month, the executive order was issued early in August. And so we have been working to assign staff, hold some initial stakeholder meetings, and lay out our work plan. Most of the community engagement, stakeholder engagement will be happening in the next 2 months. So it's going to be a bit of a sprint for the team that you see on the Zoom today. We're going to be engaging with community stakeholders, agency partners, set up a variety of meetings. Some of them will be theme-based, some of them will be geography-based. And if you'd like to engage with us in some way, I would again encourage you to reach out through our website, which is maine.gov/future/ONA, and we will share that in an email follow-up with all of you as well. So as we get into November and December, we'll be synthesizing feedback from stakeholders, looking at office design recommendations, presenting budget analyses, and then with our ultimate goal and duty to deliver a plan to the governor no later than January 19th, 2024. I'm going to send this back over to George to talk about some of our key questions. Oh, George, you're muted.
Yeah, so as I was just saying, sorry, I was muted. And as we go and meeting different people and different stakeholders, our questions will be centered around these three main questions. If the Office of New American is created, what should be the primary role or roles of the main Office of New American? How do you envision, so you will be giving us feedback as how do you envision the owner helping advance the long-term economic and civic integration of immigrants in Maine? And how do you see your organization, if you've been working with already with immigrants, how do you see your organization working with the Maine new Office of New American? What do you see as top priorities for effectively incorporating immigrants into Maine's workforce and communities? So those are the questions that we'll be asking and wanting to get feedbacks. And we want to be as more inclusive as we can, and also meeting as many people as we can, so that when this whole plan is fully developed, we'll be including many ideas of different stakeholders. So we appreciate your time and effort to join us as we develop this plan and to the conclusion.
Great. Well, George, thank you. And we're super excited to have you helping us as well. So Erica, Greg, and George, again, will all be the team helping to think about this plan and do outreach. Again, just repeating the website, maine.gov/future/ONA. So there you can sign up for the email list to get updates. There's also a contact form, and we encourage you to use that. George, Erica, and Greg will all be reading the emails. If you want to meet with us, if you want to just send us your feedback on the questions that George just laid out, that is the place to do it. And I will just say that we are working on a plan where we travel to other parts of Maine to meet with different community leaders. We're happy to have a small meeting. We are meeting with school district leaders. We will have some larger community meetings. So we are open. Obviously, there's only so many hours in the day, but we are looking forward to going on the road and hearing people's feedback. Again, please make sure you've joined our email list, and again, reach out to us through the contact form on our website. We've gotten a number of questions in the chat, and I'm going to maybe ask Tony to just read a couple of them. I'll just reiterate that yes, please sign up for our email list. You can do it again on the website that you can see on your screen. We will post the recording, and we can also post the slides that we've shared today on our website, so you can all see them. And you can go back and share this webinar with others. We've gotten maybe a couple other questions. Tony, do you want to read off any that you think are helpful that we can answer today?
Sure, Hannah, thank you. If I could ask Erica just to back up to the question slide for a minute. We do have a question from attendees about whether answers to those questions are expected now or in the future, and maybe you and George can just give a little more context about when you might want to see some of those responses to these questions coming in and how.
Sure. Thank you, Tony, and thank you so much for the question. I would say we would love your thoughts in the manner in which you would like to share them. So as Hannah mentioned, we'll be setting up some in-person sessions throughout the fall, and we're happy to, we'll certainly let you know if you're going to be in your area. And you can also share your thoughts via email. And as time provided, we're also setting up quite a few one-on-one meetings with folks, especially those who've been engaging with the immigrant, refugee, and asylum seeker population for many years and have a lot of great ideas to share about the priorities of this office.
Terrific, thank you. Looking here, I think, Hannah, you touched on it. There's a lot of questions about the availability of this presentation and the recording, which we'll try to get up as soon as possible today or tomorrow. Looking here at some of the questions, do you have one about refugees specifically? I'm not sure if we can, how far in detail we can touch on this in this webinar. But there's a question of timing about when someone may have come to Maine as a refugee and how that may play into the work that we're doing. George, Erica, any thoughts on answering that question?
So I can answer that based off of the Office of New Americans State Network. And the recommendation generally for the Offices of New Americans is that they focus really broadly on the immigrant, refugee, and asylum seeker population, regardless of when someone arrived in the country.
The answer is we are working to be as inclusive as possible. So if you want to give us input, if you this specific question mentioned Southeast Asian communities that came to Maine a longer time period ago, we are absolutely looking forward to hearing from everyone who would like to be a part of this process and give us input, whether they are part of an immigrant community or work with an immigrant community or just interested in some other way. We've heard from lots of employers, chamber groups, schools, municipalities who all have interest and input on this. So again, we would love to hear from folks who want to be engaged.
I think we've got time for just a couple more. One question here from Linda references addressing overlap in services through many agencies, and will this office sort of work to develop a plan about that? I think that sounds about right.
I mean, Linda, I think it's a good question. I think our the questions that George laid out are really what should be the top priority areas of this office. And I think an office, this will be an office in state government that will look to work across agencies and improve systems and services. So I would say that we are looking forward to hearing about areas where people think there could be improvement, where folks in state government could work better together. This will not be an office likely providing direct services, but helping with sort of system level improvement. So please, Linda, give us your feedback if you think it's a question relevant to this. It sounds like it is.
Hannah, if I could ask you too, we have a couple of just process-based questions on funding for this office and any subsequent legislative processes that may come up. Can you speak a little bit about what what it might look like after the plan is put forward to the governor in January?
Sure. Well, I will just say that generally the the way the legislature will reconvene in January, we will bring a plan to the governor and legislature in that month. The general way that new funding, new staff positions, new offices are created formally and for the long term is through a piece of legislation. It often is through the state budget, and then there will be a supplemental budget most likely at some point in the new year. So it will be initiative that will be likely proposed by the governor and considered and voted on by the legislature. So I think as we move through this process, we will be working with the governor, the Department of Administration and Financial Services on what's possible within the state budget, what makes sense, what is the location of the office to serve this long-term need. And then we will propose it to the legislature, and it will then be up to the legislature to determine if it makes sense. So lots of process to follow. Once we deliver this report by January 19th, there still is a public process. There will be public hearings, likely on whatever vehicle we put forward, whether it's in a budget or a bill. So lots of opportunities for people to weigh in the future as well. And then certainly the legislature, the statutory adjournment date is mid-April, and we do expect this to be an issue considered at some point between January and April of 2024.
Thanks, Anna. One question on sort of engagement meetings in the community. We have a question here about translation services at engagement meetings and whether we would ask that hosts for those meetings maybe provide translators, or whether it's something that we would provide. I don't know if George or Erica, you have any thoughts on what you could tell people who might be thinking about, asking us to plan a meeting in their community.
George, do you want to take that one?
I think, it's very hard to find common language where we can translate the materials into, but if we needed it to be, we will see the capacity that will afford that to us to be able to translate some of the key documents into main languages that are used throughout the community. So that's something that we will see as we go, and if there's any need of translations, we'll see what we can provide.
I will just say we have a lot of pretty detailed questions that I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to on this particular webinar, but we are able to, we will have access to those and be able to follow up in kind. We were able to get some more detailed answers to those. A lot of good stuff and a lot of very positive responses. So thank you to everybody for the compliments on getting this really important work started.
And Tony, I will just add, I for the questions in the chat, we see questions on licensing, on education issues, specifically about engagement with federal immigration policy. I think these are all important questions and things that I would encourage folks to give us their input on, because we are absolutely looking to hone the priorities and the mission and scope of the office. And I would say that the questions of scope, the questions of priorities are absolutely relevant. So again, thanks to folks for a lot of detailed questions, which the answer is we are asking for your input on the answers to many of those questions. So I think we are, again, I really am excited to see a lot of folks already so engaged. So just again, repeat, please sign up for our email list. Please find a way if you want to be engaged, to reach out via the contact form. George, Erica, and Greg will be reading those. You can give your input, as Erica said, via the form. You can ask that our team, member of our team, meets with you. Our team is actively working on putting together scheduled meetings in multiple parts of the state, both individual and larger group meetings. We are working with school districts, with chamber groups, with immigrant community groups, and we are excited to hear from people. So really appreciate all the engagement on this webinar and all of the good questions, of which we are absolutely looking for your feedback and engagement on. Anything else, George, Erica, Greg, Tony, that we want to just remind people of before we go?
I would just to add that we'll be definitely reaching out to maybe some of you already here and asking for time to meet, and if you come as a group or individual, so these just asking your inclination into receiving our emails and responding back and meeting with us. That's all I can ask. And again, at the end, this is going to be a collective effort, and the plan is going to be more inclusive, and we cannot do that without meeting with different people and collecting ideas and feedback from everyone who's going to be involved. So we appreciate your time and effort.
Great. I think that is an excellent note to end on. Thank you, George. And again, thank you to all the folks for tuning in. We look forward to keeping you updated and delivering a robust plan to the governor by January 19th or sooner. So thank you so much.